system will make me pay. But let me ask you this, why should I do the good deed in the dark? Why should I do a good deed when I'm never going to be caught?
Okay, the answer to that is because it's not enough to fake and pretend being a moral person. Because in the evolutionary environment of our Paleolithic ancestors, where there were these small groups of a couple dozen to a couple hundred people, everybody is either related to one another or knows one another very good, like any small town. Gossip spreads the information about who's moral and who's not. In time, if you are an opportunistic Machiavellian, you will be caught. People will know this guy is not to be trusted. In a huge anonymous society, like since we've lived in for the last 7,000 years or so, it's too easy to hide. So you need those codified rules. It just so happens that the first two organizations on the scene were government and religion. And they did the best they could to sort of make that happen. But what I'm saying, back then, when we spent 99% of our evolutionary history was in these small states, you really had to be moral, not fake it, not in the dark, I'm not going to obey the rules. Because if you don't believe it yourself, let me rephrase it, by believing it yourself, by actually living it, doing it, and believing it, by actually really being a good person, most of the time, being a moral person, that's the best way to convince other people you're moral, to actually be moral. So I think we evolved a deep moral sentiments, and I think Christianity got it right the same way Darwin did. We have if you want to call it a sinful side or whatever you want to call it, we have a dark, evil, nasty side. We're tribal and xenophobic, all those things, and given the chance, people often do the wrong thing. So that's why we need those rules. So to that extent, I think we're on the same page of our human nature, our sinful nature, good and evil. The only question is, where did it come from?
Right, so let's begin with a point of agreement, and then I will point out where you go wrong. The point of agreement is that the Darwinian picture of human nature and the Christian picture of human nature are quite similar. They both posit a selfishness built into human nature. And so I contrast both with what I want to call the liberal view of human nature, which is the benign view of human nature, that we have a sort of inner angel that will point us to doing the right thing in every case, that our human nature is in its essence good. I think we agree that we're dealing with the crooked timber of humanity. The problem I see it is this. I have a 12-year-old daughter. I want to teach her to do a lot of good things. For example, don't tell lies. If I were to say to her, honey, I don't think you should tell lies because your ape-like ancestors discovered that faking morality wasn't good enough. Not only should she look at me odd, but she would have a very crushing rebuttal. She would say to me, if this is part of my Darwinian programming, Dad, why do you have to teach it to me? I'm that way anyway. I already know built into my genes that I shouldn't tell lies. You don't need moral instruction here. This is part of my Darwinian nature. I would suggest no, our everyday human experience is not that. On the contrary, it is that left to its own devices, this Darwinian, or I would say Christian human nature will wreck society and wreck the world, and this is why we have institutions, legal systems, moral instruction, universities, schools, to ultimately inculcate in young people something that doesn't come now. If morality is doing what comes naturally, we would not have to mention the subject at all, any more than you don't have to tell me when I'm asleep to breathe. I can do that on my own.
If men were angels, we wouldn't need government. Yes, of course. So my answer is this, that most of the time, most people want to and do the right thing. The fact that the Enrons of the world and these kinds of events happen, make the news and make spectacular news, is because they are still relatively rare. As long as we have a rule of law in a society, and we need that because those informal rules of engagement in conflict resolution that work reasonably well in hunter-gatherer communities where everybody knows one another and the tribal elders sit down with everybody and parents cultivate the moral sentiments within their children and so on. All that works fine without writing anything down as long as it's pretty small. Once you're up into the thousands, there's too many ways to have violations. Okay? So the point of government and society and so on is because there's just too many people. So there is where religion sometimes does good, and I think Christianity figured out most of the major, like all the religions, not Christianity, Judaism really gets the credit for that, figuring out why too much gossip is dangerous, why infidelities, why violations of business contracts and friendships and so on. They figured out what's in our nature already, and since we can't ever settle on where it ultimately comes from, in that sense, then we can agree. And I guess the other answer to your question is, what would I tell my daughter? I have a 16-year-old, so I've had these sorts of conversations with her. And no, I don't give her the primate lecture, even though she's heard that in other contexts.
That's a rebuttal.
You just really start with the fundamentals of the golden rule, and how would you feel? I mean, she had kind of hurt her friend's feeling a few months ago, and I had to talk to her about this, and how would you feel if she had done that to you? And you just kind of basic stuff like that. And they get that. Of course, it helps to have a girl.
Let me press you on this a little bit, and maybe as a transition to my turn. So can I pick up after that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Is it still on? Can you hear me? All right. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a lot of people chomping at the bit to ask you guys some questions too.
Okay, well, I haven't had my turn, and I can keep it brief.
Okay, yeah.
Just one or two knockout punches should do it. All right.
Okay, all right.
When we talk about, Michael, when we talk about morality, you're speaking as if you've got these human problems and religions have sort of come up with their own stuff. When I look at a set of moral rules, and I want to take for an example the UN Charter of Human Rights, a very specific set of 20 or so propositions. We have human dignity, the rights against torture, and it goes down the list. The right to marry and form a family, the right to practice, all right. Now what's interesting is although this is the UN Declaration of Universal Rights, I think you would agree with me that these rights are not only not universally respected, they are not universally even cherished in most of the world's cultures and religions. In other words, these so-called human or universal rights are the specific property and were defended as the specific legacy of Christianity, universalized. So my point is, this is not a case of a society, this is a case of something Christian in origin and universal in application, but I don't see the idea of universal human dignity in Hinduism or in Buddhism, do you?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the UN, so we're probably in agreement there. I think the American experiment is the right way to go. The pathway we've been going down, in which our founding fathers, who for the most part were deists, not Christians, came up with this brilliant idea that no matter what religion you are, or even if you're not even religious, and even if you're an atheist, these are still the values we hold dear, which they got from Locke and Rousseau and so forth.
Well, no, wait. They didn't get them from Locke. Locke may have articulated, but they said that they got them. All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator.
Well, it says that in the Declaration of Independence. God does not appear in the Constitution.
That's true, but the Constitution is, if you will, the legal document that reflects the moral proposition of the Declaration.
Yes.
In other words, what is the source of the rights? Where would an inalienable right come from if not from God? Because all my rights that I possess are alienable, right? I own the right to my own labor, but I can sell it. Why can't I sell myself if I want to? Don't I own me?
Because we said so.
We.
Yeah.
He.
Yeah. Well, whoever he is.
Okay.
Or she.
Whoever he or she, and maybe the commandment came to Salt Lake City, but my point is, where does it come from? Is it not a transcendent principle?
I think it is transcendent.
Can you give an evolutionary explanation for it?
Even without a God, it's still transcendent.
It is still transcendent?
I think so.
Okay.
Just by saying so.
Let me push you on this line of reasoning. I want to pick up with Darwin here. You said earlier that religion, it would be nice if it is true. And here I see you picking up an old tradition, we see it in Freud and Marx. The idea of religion is wish fulfillment, right? The idea that you wish it was true, and that's kind of why a lot of people believe. I want to suggest this. Wish fulfillment cannot survive Darwinian analysis, because it can't be in our human interest to believe things that are manifestly untrue. Imagine the case of a rabbit being pursued by a lion. The rabbit says, I could run, but I shall not. There is another life waiting for me that is even better than this one. What would happen to such a rabbit? It would be promptly eaten. Rabbits that believed in afterlives would not survive. Therefore, what is the Darwinian explanation for wish fulfillment?
Well, okay, the premise, I don't agree with the premise, because I don't accept...
Let me interrupt just a second. If you'll answer this question, Dinesh is harder than anybody in the audience I've had to deal with before. So I'm going to have to go ahead and just put the kibosh on this after you give a brief answer to this, if you will, please.
Okay.
I was just getting started.
I know, I can tell, we're grabbing up.
That's fine.
You can have a few more minutes in the Q&A. Well, so I don't even buy the wish fulfillment explanation for religion. I don't think it's wish fulfillment, so I don't think it needs a Darwinian explanation. I think religion has its origins in other sources, and it's a big complex thing, as we've been talking about tonight. There's not a single explanation for religion. So I disagree with all my evolution friends.
May I pose one more question?
Wait, you said that a minute ago.
It's okay with me if you ask one more.
Well, okay, actually, in fact, this discussion is fairly rich, and I do wish to be dynamic in this, and so I know that a lot of folks are chomping at the bit, like I said earlier, to ask questions, but maybe if, by a raise of hands, if you would tell me if you would rather them continue for 2 more minutes, or to jump right to questions. Raise your hands if you wish to continue for 2 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Give me another one.
Thank you.
Bring it on.
It's Shermer and D'Souza against the moderator at this point. Okay. You said something that, on the surface of it, would be a little troubling to a believer, that by measures of social pathology, Christians, to put it in religious language, commit more sins than non-Christians.
Or at least don't do any better.
Or if you look at social pathologies, you find that states that are secular, like Massachusetts, have lower rates of divorce than states like Mississippi that are more religious. I think that's true, and actually I think that may suggest something very interesting about religion, which is that it draws people